Let let me introduce the panelists, and this is the order in which we are going to be talking. Sujata Ramanujan is going to talk first, Sandhi is going to talk next, and I'm going to talk last. Now, Sujata, I'm going to give a brief introduction to everybody. I don't want to take up all the time. It'll take forever to introduce all of you, in detail. Sujata has been a serial entrepreneur with 25 years of experience in clinical devices and consumer electronics. She was a uh, she has grown three startup businesses, and she was a CTO and product line manager of mammography, CAD, and pediatric businesses within Kodak and Carestream. And her technical leadership and laboratory head positions uh, at Chrysler, GE, and Kodak and Intrinsic Materials are well known. She holds 28 issued patents, and basically she has served on investment advisories in U.S., Canada, and Israel. She's now the head of, she's the managing director of Luminate, which is a startup accelerator and incubator in Rochester. Rochester, New York is arguably the world's capital in optics. Sujata holds a PhD from University of Michigan, and she's a senior member of the IEEE, fellow of the Optical Society of America, and an executive board member of the National Women's Hall of Fame. Now, Sandhi Bhide is the president of Onvaya, which specializes in consulting and advising Internet of Things, private equity, hedge fund, and other financial institutions. More recently, Sandhi worked as the director of innovation, CTO, and GM at an internal IoT platform startup at Intel, developed key strategies beyond product group and roadmaps. And he has 35 plus years of recognition as an innovator, visionary in leading strategy development, implementation of new innovative and profitable products. Um, he's also he's an Edison Award inventor, innovator, and his recent focuses areas are IoT and smart cities, lighting, homes, buildings, retail, offices, and health. And the last speaker would be myself, and I'll be talking about affordable ventilators for low and middle income countries. And let's start with Sujata. I will stop sharing the screen. And Sujata, would you share your screen, please?
Slideshow mode. Okay, can you see?
Hang on. Yes, I can see it.
All right. So thank you for that kind introduction, Ram, and thank you for including us in this exciting forum. So I want to talk to you a little bit about innovation, how innovation adapts to what's happening around us. As Ram mentioned, I run Luminate, which is an investment fund, and it is also an accelerator. And every year we bring in 10 companies to the Rochester area. We invest some seed money in them, $100,000. And then at the end of 6 months, we put up to another million in one or more of the companies. That's how we help increase innovation and help people in early stage companies. Our focus is optics, photonics, and imaging, but we're not a market focus, we're a tech focus, which means that we see technology hitting multiple markets and multiple needs. It just has to be based in the optoelectronics industry. So let's talk a little bit about necessity and how necessity is in the mother invention. This is going to walk you through this talk. And this talk is, a set of examples of how different companies have adapted. And I should start this by telling you that Luminate has 30 companies in the portfolio. So most of the companies that I will mention here, most but not all, are Luminate companies, meaning that at some point or another we have invested in them. So let's talk about some of the primary challenges that we have seen in the last year, specifically due to COVID. We see a lot of issues around prevention, sanitation, cleaning. I'm going through the first column there. And then the next question is, okay, so we're trying to prevent, but we're not so necessarily so good at that. We need to look at testing and access at speed and cost and tracking. All those kinds of things are fast becoming important in this time. The third thing is, how do we monitor people? How do we make sure their health is good? How do we tell them when to come in? How do we provide care and treatment to people when our hospitals are overwhelmed, when there's, and COVID is really only one of the problems, right? So COVID is a defining problem that tells you that hospitals are getting, but being sick in this time of COVID, even if it's not COVID, is challenging. So if you call 911 and say, I have a respiratory problem, they're going to treat it like COVID. It may not be COVID. You may have trouble accessing less than critical medical care because hospitals are overwhelmed. Next thing on the list is logistics. So let's say this vaccine comes soon. Fabulous. How do we get it out to everyone? How do we make sure that people are actually getting the correct vaccine in the correct batch? How do you make sure that some charlatan isn't passing off some whatever placebo they've created to as a vaccine and duping people? Because God knows we know enough of this goes on worldwide. How do you offer, so those are some of the more directly detailing issues with COVID, but there are other issues as well. Like, how do we do more remote teaching and virtual education? Most of us have children or grandchildren or know somebody that's at home trying to learn now, because in things that were normally taught in school, how do we make that more thorough? And also, how do we offer any remote nursing? So not necessarily for COVID, but issues that would have normally brought a person more regularly to a nursing home or to a hospital that no longer have that easy access to physicians. How do we monitor them? How do we take care of them in this difficult time? So those were the challenges of COVID. And what we saw, there's a lot of innovation, and necessity is the mother of innovation. So we saw a lot of different things coming up. Companies, a lot of time already having the technology, maybe doing something else with them. Maybe it's out in the industry, but saying, okay, I'm going to change. I'm going to pivot now, and I'm going to take this innovation and make it work for this problem. And so we see a whole bunch of different things, starting with prevention and cleaning. We see LED sterilization. We see HVAC innovation. And testing and access, we see a lot more analytical equipment. And I'm focusing on the optical engineering, electrical and optical engineering, because that's my area of expertise. But every area, like software engineering, data analysis, everybody's experiencing this. How do I take what I know and make it useful? In monitoring, we see a lot more remote patient monitoring, care and treatment, a great deal of access of wearables and wearable equipment. In logistics, we see more encryption, more tracking. In remote teaching, we see more use of AR, VR. And in remote nursing, we see a lot more equipment and software enabling ease of use and ease of analysis. And I've made a list of some, by no means a complete list of companies there and what they were doing. And I'm going to go company by company and show you what they were doing. And these are examples, so they're not by any means a comprehensive list, but I want to show you how a very basic technology can address a very significant issue. And I also want to make you see listed here, did not come into being because of COVID. Each one of these companies was an innovative entrepreneurial team that was already doing something and realized that they could turn what they knew into a useful solution. The first one is not a Luminate team. So my only knowledge of them is what I've read, and it's really quite obvious and quite nice. And that's that cleanliness is a big issue. So pardon me if I pronounce this team's name wrong, Vive. They are LED lighting. And very soon you'll see them in all the Delta Airlines flights. They're installing antimicrobial cleanliness. Basically, you can't really trust people to be clean. You can put all the nice dispensers and give them instructions, but people are not always clean. So having something like this that's kind of a little bit more universal is very easy, and it's very logical, and it's something that this company had in place. I mean, not necessarily for COVID, but a great deep knowledge of, and was able to quickly provide this solution and grow as a result. UV and other antimicrobial methods are known and only recently begun getting deployed, but it really does stand to reason that we would see more of this type of deployment. The next company I wanted to show you is a company called Xprimary. Xprimary was already developing assay and assay analysis readout tools. One of the big issues with getting testing results quickly, and this is not just a COVID question, is that you have these bulky, expensive pieces of equipment that are designed to process and read the assay. So if you take data from somebody, which is basically take a sample, you put it in whatever sample handling thing it is, and it has to go somewhere, and it has to be analyzed, and it has to be sent back. So you're talking about, in the best case scenario, a $40,000 or $50,000 piece of equipment and a 3-day turnaround. And that's what most people are stuck doing right now. So this company had already begun to look at what can we do to speed this procedure up, what optical technologies can we use. And then they developed a small battery-powered instrument that retails for under $5,000. That's really not for the high-end labs, but they originally planned it for like lower-end labs, but really it can be used in a remote location, where you can get a quantitative 5-minute, $5 test with very high sensitivity. And that's done because the readout mechanism is an optoelectronic readout mechanism, and it's very, very contained. So they have an optical viewport, and you can get a result within a minute, as opposed to having to go through a very complicated chemical analysis, an expensive piece of equipment. So something like this makes remote testing and deployment of testing much more accessible. But this is not a company that by any means is dependent on this product to succeed. This company is making laboratory equipment more accessible in general. This is one example of how they can do it. And they're showing a nasal swab here, but there are many different ways to get data into the assay. So this is an example where somebody took something they were already working on, which was really quite complex. This is Illuminate team. They're part of our last cohort, and we did invest in them. So it's called Xprimary, and I think you'll see good things from them. The next company I want to show you is Double Helix, and Double Helix has been in business for a number of years actually, and they're based on Nobel Prize winning technology and they're based out of Boulder, Colorado. They also are an Illuminate team, and what they were doing was enabling a different look at research and deep research into samples. And because they could visualize in real time at a nanoscale. In microscopy, one of the big challenges we face is that you either get resolution or you get depth of focus, which makes it very, very difficult to do that real-time analysis. You either have to go layer by layer by layer, looking at something and then reconstructing, or you have to lose some of the resolution to get that depth. And so you have a company here that could really give you a long throw and yet really, really fine micro resolution here. And you can see some examples of how much information is lost in a 2-dimensional typical scan. So this is a single shot acquisition. It's a very simple addition to existing microscopy. They basically screw into the arm this extra piece with this diffraction grading piece inside it. And it has really excellent axial precision. It has beautiful depth of focus, and it's real time. And what that means is for people doing research in this field, in pharmaceuticals and places like that, that they're able to see real-time effects of drugs, as opposed to typical pharmaceutical research, which would have you look for the effects. So you'd have controls and you try different things and you'd say, okay, well, here are the effects on my sample. You do that still, but you can also see in real time the chemical analysis, the molecular behavior that the drug is causing. So that means that a lot of poor data can be tossed out. A lot of good candidates can be more quickly identified. It really makes the drug development process much more robust and very, very quick. And this is an example of a company that's actually doing quite well and in pharmaceutical. And when they realized that there was an issue with this particular branch of pharmaceutical research needing to move faster, they came with a solution that allows scientists to really understand what they're seeing a lot faster. Again, another really good example of a very complex problem made easier by good optoelectronics. The next company I'm going to show you addresses the question of monitoring. And VPG HealthCam started also a Illuminate company a number of years ago. And they're basically looking at cardiovascular health. So they were looking at facial analysis and doing detailed image analysis of the face they were able to detect cardiovascular irregularities. And it's different from a wearable or something, because what it is it's like, so you have your phone and it's running in the background of your phone. So every time you're playing around with your phone or your iPad or whatever, it's collecting data, it's collecting data, it's collecting data. And all of a sudden, if something starts to go wrong and you have arrhythmia, for instance, the analysis of that data of your face should alert you that you are having a problem, and it will send an alert. It's not something you have to wear. It's something that's already in your life already. And that you're using prolifically. It is a software tool. It is an image analysis tool, and it's very extremely accurate. This is a company that had been working in cardiovascular health for a number of years. They had a different company called iCardiac that they sold for cardiac devices, and they moved on to this. It's a very seasoned team of cardiology experts who turned their attention to remote patient monitoring. Their target at the time were elderly people at home who need to have home nursing care. But in this time of COVID, this is actually really helpful, not just for COVID cases, but for cardiovascular cases, elderly people who maybe you don't want to bring them into a hospital or into an environment where there are a lot of other people. So that was kind of a good example of monitoring. Ram, you're going to have to tell me if I'm taking too much time. I'm trying to keep on time. You're on mute.
Yeah, can you speed it up a little bit, please?
Sure. So this one is Think Bio, which is an Irish company that has a COVID monitoring platform that they're deploying to various facilities on assisted living, home healthcare, and it really is a whole platform that helps facility administrators seamlessly execute a patient's healthcare. This is out of Ireland, and they are funded specifically to look at the COVID issues, but they also are in place. They are a Luminate company. And the last, I have a couple more companies. Hakian does logistics. What they are doing is real actual random number generation. So for pharmaceutical tracking, they're able to better track, so you know you're getting the real thing. Simulated inanimate SIM, as we call them, does AR or virtual assisted teaching tools for surgical tools. So they build the Phantom as well as the AR system, allowing students to learn how to perform surgery, not on actually you. And the last company I want to show you is Rubidetection, and they look at skin health. And they're enabling nurses and people like that to use spectroscopy to take a quick look at someone's skin to see if they're developing a bed sore or a diabetic ulcer or something very quickly and assess it without them having to come into the hospital, without them being in actual pain, and much sooner than they would otherwise. And in each of these cases, this is a case of invention coming from necessity. So those are the companies I wanted to show you. I also will tell you we're Illuminate. We're a non-profit. We fund these types of technologies, and it's illuminate.org. We provide funding, training, advisors. Log on if you think you have a great idea. Our application window is open till first week of January. And I'm dying to see what exciting things you come up with. That's us. I'm going to stop sharing.
Sandhi, you're next.
Sorry, and I'm sure now you are able to hear.
Not able to see your screen. Oh, it's quite tiny.
How about now?
No, hang on.
At least from your screen sharing.
Yes, screen. Yeah, I've got an issue here. Continue, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Sujata. That was a good segue. I'm Sandhi Bhide, as Sriram mentioned. Thank you for the introduction. Currently I'm running 3 startups at the same time. One is already out there, and 2 are stealth mode right now. With that quick introduction, As we probably all know, at least in the United States, if you look at the healthcare spending, is going out of control. And it's predicted in a few years we'll reach 1/5 of our P, and that's just not sustainable. And there are ways to reduce that percentage cost of GDP, and that's what today. And at the same time, you're also seeing a phenomenal growth in the global medical device, and that growth has been fueled by consumer need, and there have been amazing number of advances all the way from sensing to computing to networking to AI, and that's fueling that growth. One of the things that we have seen in computers is also being applied now to medical technology. It was very centralized, where it went to a hospital, to a new state where now you see hospital, small lablet everywhere, where they're all connected, and people go to a local hospital or see a physician. And what we really have, especially in the environment of epidemics, is a highly distributed system. Individuals have devices, and they're all sharing information, because at the end of the day, about what is the next person have, or that person that might infect me. And I'll go a little more into the detail of the model, how this is happening. Now, there are many reasons for the high cost, insane cost of healthcare. It's as simple as when you have a cough and cold, you run to a doctor, and both doctor's time and your time is wasted if it was just a simple cold. We also take unhealthy foods. We, of course, do not take as much exercise, and whole life is built on stress and lack of sleep. Now, we have started seeing many consumer devices, they monitor health and well-being, and a lot of other things like air and water and food we eat, the calorie values of the food that we eat, how much stress or sleep quality are we getting, and other things like our BP or our oxygen or temperature, and in some cases even output of our excretion as indication of our health. What we really need is consumer devices that tell us whether it is run-of-the-mill problem or something that we need to actually see a physician. So that one is very critical, and also be able to monitor the environment in this new era of epidemics, something that's easy, affordable, and unambiguous detection of pathogens. And what that will do is reduce the cost of going to a hospital or a physician. And at the end of the day, devices can tell us a whole lot, but eventually there is human action that must follow. In terms of healthcare system, there are advances at every front, all the way from electronic medical records to telemedicine systems to pharmacy systems, and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and DL. But what we really need to have is a new concept I call mobile phone is our new stethoscope. What I mean by that is there are a multiple number of variables, whether the stuff that we take in terms of air, food, water, the things that we excrete, or the environment that we will live in. So continuing with the concept of mobile phone being the new stethoscope, if we could have devices that monitor and track a patient, someone that's already a patient, how do we monitor and track their health, and on an ongoing basis, in some cases be able to do remote diagnostic assistance and help them, and especially in case of geriatric patient, people who are losing their memory, actually help them on a day-to-day basis. The second part, which is the wellness, that means we are mostly okay, but we want to make sure that we detect things ahead of time before we end up in a problem. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about later on today is the stuff that we take in, either in terms of carbon monoxides or pathogens, besides many other things that I mentioned that we measure, including how long are we sleeping, and what level of stress we have, because those are major contributors to our health. Surrounding all these devices, whether they monitor patient at the hospital, home, or anywhere else, as we are moving around, or monitor our health, we need to have a smooth way of managing them. We want to make sure that they are secure, and privacy and identity protection are an overarching principle surrounding all these devices. Now, there are devices that are already on the market that look at various different types of things. Interesting thing, rather than describing each one of them, as one of the judges for Edison Awards, as Sriram mentioned, I found an interesting thing called a throat scope. So rather than taking your son or daughter to see a doctor, this was a little piece, a stick, that had a camera and LED, and had Wi-Fi Bluetooth capability. All you need to do is insert that in your child's throat. It would illuminate the area, take a picture, and send it to the physician. And the physician can say, no, it's run-of-the-mill cold. Just take rest, and that's okay. Or I think you have a strep throat. You need to come and see me. So now that itself reduces if this is an example, this itself reduces the cost of seeing a doctor and doctor's time and your time. You will see that there are a variety of devices, that are either on your skin, in your clothing, to actually having external devices that work as accessories to your phone and be able to help that device to send that information to your doctor. And I had worked with Janusz Bryzek and at the Trillion Sensor Summit since about 2012, and we have been looking at a variety of technologies that actually help the end user. I'll just spend only a little time here. This is just to show that there are many more devices that watch your blood pressure, oxygen, EKG, and a variety of things. Now, these are not going to replace doctors. What these are doing is giving an early indication, which tells you whether you should go and see a doctor or not. And many more. One thing that I wanted to talk about was moldable and foldable devices and sensors and processing units that are wrapped around a film that adapt to your body. Which is what I call here tattooed sensors. This has come from UCSD. So moving into the part of early detection of pathogens around in your surroundings, today, as you all know, there are two types of tests, diagnostic and antibody test. They both are being developed. Some are there. But today, there is really no FDA approved or clear device for COVID-19, and they have, of course, issued over 200 emergency use authorizations. Also with diagnostic tests, samples get collected and from person's nose or throat. But in either of those cases, this is where either somebody is already infected and there are visible signs, or somebody is infected but there are no visible signs, which is what is meant by asymptomatic. But today, there are no authorized COVID tests to be completely used and processed at home, where you could take your own swab, put it into a little hole, and it tells you whether you're infected or not. And these two methods that I talked about, whether it's diagnostics and antibody tests, take considerable amount of time, anywhere from 30 minutes to several days. And by that time, a whole number of things could be changing inside your body. This is just a quick view for people who are not aware of what diagnostic tests are. They show if you have an active coronavirus infection. The antibody test is you actually take a sample of your swab from your mouth or maybe blood, and you figure out if you have antibodies that are fighting with the virus. And a lot of these antibodies take several days to weeks to develop. And again, both of these take considerable amount of time. What is now making it possible to have individual devices are phenomenal progress that's being made in sensing devices in terms of flexible printed circuit technology. The amount of processing you can do all the way up into battery technologies that are small enough and powerful enough to AI and machine learning and deep learning. And now that has enabled us to focus on new sensing devices. Just to give you the holy grail of coronavirus testing is something that's as easy to sample from ambient air or by taking a swab or through a breathalyzer, something that gives you rapid results, 8 to 10 seconds. So as children are walking into a school, they get tested, and it's as simple of an indication that somebody like a security personnel can handle. Where it says green, that means, hey child or teacher, you can go in. Yellow means there is a problem, you need to be either tested or need comprehensive test. And red means, hey, you go home and quarantine yourself. Surrounding that, and the technology that we want to get into is something what I call out of sight, out of mind technology. That means you just walk in, you don't feel like you are being tested, but you are indeed being tested for a variety of several different types of viruses and bacteria. I call them pathogens. So that's the holy grail and rapid results that are required that would enable this planet, so to say, either going to school or going to work or going to theaters to going to restaurants, if we had the simple and accurate testing. Just a quick view. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. On the right-hand side, what you have to look is number of virus particles that leave your body, from 20 through regular breathing to when you cough or sneeze, you're letting go over 200 million virus particles into the air. So this is not a joke. Most of the large droplets fall on the ground, but aerosols will continue in the air for 12 to even 30 feet, which is beyond the normal of 6 feet. And you can look at the very high risk areas, especially with HVAC system recirculating the air in the restaurants and schools and at parties and weddings and businesses and arenas and concerts and cinemas, all are pointing to very high risk. So that shows you the necessity that if we could control it right at the human level, it will help stop the spread of the coronavirus. So there are a number of innovations that I'm looking at and startups are looking at, is what I call non-traditional methods of sensing, which is not quite the PCR method, which requires agents to be tested. There are other methods like electrophoresis, which is looking at movement of charged particles in electric field, and then methods such as Raman spectroscopy to determine vibration of molecules. At the end of the day, the virus is a complex bundle of a variety of proteins, and you can look at structural fingerprints by which you could identify them non-destructively based on interaction of light with the chemical bond or the charge on a variety of these particles. And if some of these molecules don't have their inherent charge, you can charge them and look at their dipole moment and phase shift under electric field. So this is some of the, without giving you a lot of details, this is some of my couple of startups that I'm involved in is looking at. Last couple of slides.
Can you speed it up,
there
please?
is, last couple of things, that is coming to our help is, of course, AI, DL, ML. And they can help where the devices not only are sensing, but they are also learning along the way, and helping to make the predictions and measurements more accurate. And we don't have to depend upon the information going back all the way to the cloud. The end nodes themselves can learn over time. Of course, we have supercomputing and data analytics to understand large data sets within a county or in a city. And then that way, these consumer devices become part of the overall healthcare digital transformation. So that's my quick bio, and thank you very much for your time. And apologize if I have gone over time.
No,
Sriram.
you're doing
Thank you for
just
your
fine.
time.
So
I will stop the share so you can.
I can try to share now. Can everybody see my share?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to talk after these two great speakers. I mean, it's a hard act to follow. But the area I'm talking about is an area that I've been consumed with for the past few months. Is affordable ventilators, and if you look at it, there are countries with few or no ventilators. Modern ventilators are not affordable. They're about $10,000 to $25,000, well within the reach of even hospitals within the United States. And then donated ventilators are many times inoperative or obsolete, don't get spare parts, get trained biomeds are sparse. So if you look at the right-hand side, if you look at this is of April 17, 2020, and you will see that, countries like Somalia at that time had no ventilators. Then you looked at other countries like Congo, 5 ventilators, that is 1 ventilator for 20 million people, which in the age of COVID, it's quite frightening. So there's a need to have affordable ventilator technology. And a group of us are looking at coming up with some open source tools for such technology. Now, this is the role of consumer electronics for low and middle income countries. You need to have affordability, so electronic components should be available in millions at low prices. That takes us to consumer electronic components. Then we need to be quite robust, because in many of these countries, actually things are pretty rough. I mean, you don't even, and you may not have air conditioning the way we have it here. And then we need to have repairability, because if you have consumer electronics components, so the chances are they're available worldwide. Now, if you were to look at cost-effective ventilators for LMICs, we could look at a single or multiple compressor for multiplicity of patients. It would be a hub and spoke model. And more importantly, you could have 3D printed compressors. The reason being, when COVID started to be a problem, people were trying to hack rescue respirators using ambu bags. Now they are fine for transport, but furthermore, I mean, these bags are not available in many other countries. So now let's take a 3D printer, even if it takes a few days to print a compressor and its components. For a place like Somalia, you could have a few ventilators in a few days. Then you could have and the next thing is distributed control for each patient. Now you have You have Raspberry Pis, Arduinos, ESP32s as controllers, and some of these things have more power than all the computers in NASA in 1969 when we went to the moon. Then we can also have high frequency air valves that could either be printed or bought. And then you need a blender for oxygen because you need to blend oxygen with room air. Then you need humidifiers. And then you could have standard user interfaces and displays. You could use tablets or Androids for display and control. These could be Wi-Fi enabled. And we could put all the, and you could see some of these tools on open source areas like GitHub. And it's important to have open source tools, because if you had to pay for these tools, like for example, if we did everything in MATLAB, people would have to buy a MATLAB license, which is just prohibitive for some of the low and middle income countries. So now this is a quick architecture of, I don't want to go into too many details here. Essentially, this is a hub and spoke model where you have two compressors, because if one fails, you still have redundancy. And then this is servicing 8 patients. And here you see you could have patient 1 through patient 8, for example. And then you have user interfaces that go to this single board. Essentially, something that I've discussed in previous IEEE talks, you could instantiate a ventilator, which is good enough to do ventilation for COVID patients. Now, very important, I mean, you just don't design a ventilator and throw it over the wall. You should follow the standards, even though countries may not have regulatory approvals for standards. Essentially, my philosophy, having designed medical devices for 4.5 decades, is you design as if the device may be used on you one day. And that's happened to me with some of the devices that I have designed. And I wasn't nervous. And we follow all the safety standards, which are operator and patient safety, leakage currents, et cetera, et cetera. And these are nicely documented, both in all the regulatory bodies. And then there are operational standards like AMI and ANSI, and you need to take care of single fault failures. For example, I showed 2 compressors. If one compressor goes, you don't want the patient to die. And then you need to have good documentation standards and good manufacturing practices. And essentially, that is briefly about some of the ventilator development that I'm involved with, including an open source ventilator development that a few of us have gotten together to come up with a rational way of building affordable ventilators. With that, I'm going to open up the, I will stop sharing. And in the next few minutes, I'd like to open up for questions. And if you could type in the questions in the chat window, and we'll try to, we'd answer those questions. So go ahead. We have about 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes before the final program. And so thank you very much.
So Ram, from time to time, these questions have started, and while you are presenting, we have been typing away.
Yeah. I've got a question. Thank you for the great talks, and it's really kind of illustrate the bright future we are having. My only problem is that, there is something in the person-to-person contact when you go and see a doctor, okay, that could not translate into telemedicine, okay? And I know it from personal experience. So how do we ensure that the person-to-person still exists while we take advantage of new technologies? And I know that once the insurance companies are going to, it's cheaper for them to have a teleconference office appointment with the doctor than face-to-face. Of course, they're not going to pay for face-to-face. But that's dangerous, and we know for over generation that sometimes the personal contact with the doctor, that's the thing that actually cures you, not sometimes the medication or the test. What do you think?
One of my thoughts on that, and I don't disagree. I think there's some about the about care being actually caring and having somebody be there and take care of you is actually terribly important. And I don't think that any of the tools that we offer are meant to take the place of, first of all, they're not diagnostic. They tend to be decision support, not diagnostic. And so that needs to still be a human working with it. I think it's just meant to alleviate, the biggest issue is that care may need to be constant. Care may need to be more frequent than the doctor can see them. Still going to see their doctor, going to those doctor's appointments. But the other thing we're hoping when we give these enabling technologies out there is that home care becomes a little bit easier. So if you have or nursing home care where a nurse's attendant or a clinical caregiver is able to be there and be that human contact and still get the data much more regularly than a person can get to a doctor. But I don't think it's meant to take the place of a physician at any time. Most of these are absolutely not labeled diagnostic. Sandhi, you want to comment?
Yeah, I agree with you, both of you, 100%. I mean, I always use the AI technologies when Google sifts through 2 million pictures to figure out whether a picture is a cat. It's not looking at every picture in minute details. It's going through a step-by-step process of categorization. And then eventually you're reducing it to a few number where you can go into the detailed aspects of a picture. Same thing here. Instead of sending every patient for every cut, bruise, or little thing that happened to you just because you start coughing, is no reason to run to a physician. So what these devices are doing is simply whether this is run of the mill. It's I come from statistical process control, so I always look at upper and lower control limits. Whether your life is within upper and lower control limits, you can stay home, and your temperature, blood pressure varies during the day, including your height. It's only when it's going out of control or the showing that there is something impending going to happen, it should tell you, hey, go to the doctor. And one more point, the human touch or looking 5 feet away at the doctor and doctor touching you is the most important thing. Half of the time, I tell you personally, when I see a doctor, half of my problems are gone when I just see a doctor. So nothing in this that we are saying is disassociating doctor. It's just saying instead of 1,000 visits, can we reduce it to 50 visits a day at the hospital to reduce the overall burden on the hospital system?
I see a question in the chat window, and I think you should probably answer this one. It says the consumer side of the device adoption process seems simpler than the medical side. True. How do you break the resistance to institutional adoption of new technology? Not a trivial problem, but do you want to go ahead? Something?
No, I think people, I have done a lot of studies with consumer devices. So it's easier to have a spareable money to say, hey, I'm going to get an SpO2 or I'm going to get this and that. The question is, life is not about one variable. If you just look at our body has hundreds of sensors, not just the 5 sensors, right? There are bodies that are sensors inside the body that keep me erect throughout the day and not that's why I don't fall on the ground. So you have to look at multiple of the sensing that's coming from internal body, and the health decision is a complex one. So the adoption process is easy, single measurement like blood pressure, but how does that blood pressure relate to my fat content, to my oxygen content, to what the galvanic sensor is sensing on my skin? For that, you need humans who have gone through years of becoming an MD and years of experience.
I think that if you want to look at how does one get a consumer technology into a medical field, it is a non-trivial thing, but it really is built on a couple of key elements. One is collaborative clinical data. So saying pulse oximeters, or you can hop online and buy yourself a pulse oximeter. It's not exactly a tough device to get a hold of. But if you're going to do some kind of analysis based on that, you think is a clinical analysis, you need to do a controlled clinical study, and you need to have a medical professional and I know IRB approved protocol in place. That once you have data done in that kind of context with the right collaborative partner, your ability to go through the FDA process as well as to get clinical evidence goes up. Yes, it is time consuming, and yes, it is not. It is a costly approach, but it is done for our own protection, because otherwise anybody who invents anything could claim it was diagnostic and we'd all be dying of it.
Yeah.
So the key thing is collaborative partners and clinical studies.
But I think I didn't answer, how do you break resistance to institutional adoption? I think these institutions are adopting, right? A few years ago, I know nurses came and had a patch on my hand to measure blood pressure and with pump and everything. Nowadays, it's electronic, because the level of performance, consistent performance, the accuracy, all of that have caught up to the level of looking at a more mercury going up and down. So they will adopt, provided it has the same level of performance.
So I'm looking at more of these questions here. Have you considered the hypochondriacs among us? Believe me, I live with a few hypochondriacs, and it's a dangerous thing. I laugh, but it's actually kind of a dangerous thing, right? Because some women ban certain websites in their house, tell their husbands and children you can't. WebMD is on my list of things that are banned, because I'm really tired of the self-diagnostic nonsense that comes out of people. But some of these remote monitoring platforms, that sounded sexist. I'm just referring to me when I said I banned certain websites in WebMD. Some of these monitoring platforms it's a double-edged sword, can be really helpful, because if you have a hypochondriac, you have somebody who's inclined to call, help me, I'm dying, my blood pressure is up. But if they are remote monitored regularly, their healthcare professional is seeing the data and is able to say, yeah, no, today is not the day. Similarly, skin anomaly one, because it's really difficult. And I don't say this is hypochondria. You see a weird blemish or something, you're supposed to get that checked out. It could be something very serious. It could be a weird blemish. Having remote monitoring tools like Rubotection's tool to be able to look at skin health will give the physician a chance to say, you know what, you need to come in now. This thing's serious. This could be the beginning bed sores, for instance. Start out, you can't even tell. You press. Next thing you know, they're down to the bone and the person's in trouble. Or it could be they bump themselves and they'll get over it. But these remote tools actually help weed out what really needs to come into the physician's office.
Sujata, you bring up a very good point. It's not an instantaneous measurement of something, right? It's a continuous monitoring. Things you don't get a heart attack just like that, right? There are a lot of things that you can see ahead of time of an impending heart attack or something bad happening. And if your physician is watching maybe once a day, there are tools that say, hey, you ought to be looking at Sandhi. He might be developing a problem. And then say, hey, please come and see me right away.
Well, it's similar to, taking blood pressure once a day, even though it is not a very accurate measurement really to look at cardiovascular physiology. You got to look at it a few times a day. Otherwise, if you don't have a trend, it's a useless measurement.
Averaging the data is actually terribly important. And I use this as, I guess, as another semi-humorous thing. Data has to be taken at the same time, the same control, and the same point, which is really difficult to do when you're remote monitoring. And I used to joke with my friends, and we all did food thing, that we would measure our weight. It had to be done at the same day, at the same time. And I used to joke I have to stand sideways with my left foot up to get just the right reading. But if you take a lot of readings across the day, if it's continuously monitoring you, it averages out those weirdnesses, like where's your foot, where's your hand, is your blood pressure off? And continuous monitoring takes a lot of the error of data collection out of things.
May I bring another small point? You know, I live in Portland, which is a big city, and there are hospitals all around. But just 200 miles east in Oregon, there are not very many doctors. There are not very many hospitals. There are not very many physicians. And you have to have a method to be able to say, if it takes 2 hours for me to drive, to be able to continuously monitor in the rural areas where there are no doctors and nurses, which give you an early indication. So you can, at least somebody can take you to a hospital ahead of time before something bad happens.
Yeah, the case in point are the new continuous glucose monitors where you get a reading every 5 minutes. And that's a much better trend than having to do finger sticks 3 or 4 times a day, and people don't like that. And that gives you a better idea of your progression of disease and what happens when you eat food you shouldn't be eating. And that is one example of continuous monitoring that has fruition these days, because because diabetes is a chronic disease that costs a lot of money to the taxpayer and to individuals.
I see it.
And one other thing, yeah. No, I was going to say, as I was mentioning in my my presentation, all of these devices are fantastic. At the end of the day, is the human action. As if tomorrow, if I didn't have a food calorie device, but when I see that brownie, I know it has 5,000 calories, and the device might tell me I shouldn't be eating it, but I still eat it. So at the end of the day, beyond devices, there is also human action that has to augment in where you stop or you do something about based on what the device tells you.
Oh,
Sorry,
I was just
Sujata,
reading a question here, and I wanted to take a really quick shot at a very long answer. And it is, how do you convince companies career innovations? Do you have to go one insurer at a time, a broader approach? Now, when we're working with medical, I actually have a person come in and do a whole lecture series on insurance coding for my med device companies. The easiest is to know the coding ahead of time. And if your device can use an existing insurance code, and then it'll automatically be covered. There is no existing code. You are going to have to collect enough data to convince the insurance company that this is a money-saving venture for them. Because insurance companies are about profitability. So if you say, oh, it's going to save lives, you have to say, by doing this test, you're saving this much downstream medical cost. You're saving all these other things, which is where a lot of the detection work comes from. And if you can convince them that this analytical approach and this device, if 50 people and one person was a cardiac patient and you caught it early, you've just saved $500,000 in insured medical coverage, then you'll be able to convince them. But you have to get that data in place. And the best way to do that is both a combination of clinical data and looking at existing reimbursement codes and working with a clinical institution, a large clinical institution, like a university scale hospital, with that data so that you can go together to the insurance organizations. This is what it looks like. It is not adopted on a company by company basis. It's not like, okay, Blue Cross Blue Shield says yes. It really is, you have to do a net sell of whether it's reimbursable if it's outside of the standing codes.
Sujata, it sometimes takes about 5 years to get a new code.
Yeah, it can take a long time to get a new code, which is why it's really important to look at what the current, and you'd be surprised how soft some of those reimbursement codes are worded. I look at like the dentist. My daughter had to have some dental thing done, and it took a few minutes, and it fell under because the procedure was the same, although the diagnosis was different, it got reimbursed, which was nice because I was afraid I was going to have to pay $200 something out of pocket for that. But go through the codes very carefully and convince yourself you can use one. Convince insurance company.
One of these days we'll see doctors being responsible for the patients rather than insurance people being responsible for patients.
It'd be nice if the choose the care and not the insurance company.
Yeah. but I won't go into the politics of it. There is, I don't think I'm going to see it in my lifetime.
Yeah, especially if we're able to pick our care.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out.
Any online questions, or you type in?
I'm looking at this one, the Star Trek one that says the software can cause a rise in white coat syndrome. Yes, it can. That's why it is a diagnostic aid. It is not a diagnostic tool. So if your device or whatever indicates a problem, if Dr. Internet tells you it's a problem, go see actual doctor. Dr. Internet is not a diagnostic tool either.
Yeah. And by the way, some of the devices that I talked about, there are two ways I'm looking at, for example, coronavirus. You can look at, the biggest culprit is HVAC system, which just takes the air from one student, maybe in one classroom, and it's an effective way of spreading the viruses to all classrooms. That's one horrible way, but it's like driving, looking into the rear view mirror. I think some of the things that we need to look for is forward looking and say, who is and who is not. That's why I had this concept of red, yellow, and green. Red means we definitely can say that there is something really bad. Yellow means I'm not sure. Now go and take a detailed test to figure out. And then green tells you're so far out on the left that there is no way. I'm not seeing even one
By
virus
the way,
particle.
we need to wrap up
minimum virus
because
particle.
the closing ceremony is happening right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
Okay.
Thank you, everyone,
No
and thank you, Sujata, and for the great presentations, and thank everybody for listening and asking these thought-provoking questions. And
Pleasure was ours, Sriram. Thank you very much for including us and
Thank
thinking
you.
of us.
oh,
Thank you. It was really a pleasure, and I really enjoyed, and I can see that others also.